From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernisham. Before I introduce this episode's guest, another Democrat seeking the western North Carolina seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, I think I need to provide some context about this particular moment in American political history. It's a clip from the speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate by North Carolina's Thom Tillis, a Republican who isn't at all happy with the administration he helped elect and some of the people he helped put in cabinet. He's talking about the idea of invading Greenland, which is something that Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, one of President Donald Trump's closest advisors, would very much like to see happen.
And I would defy you to find any credible general with a star on his shoulder who would say that it is, because they understand that the NATO alliance is what has kept this nation largely, or this world, largely safe for over 75 years. The flip side could be that Mr. Miller or somebody else said, hey, this would be cool. Let's take over Greenland. It'll be like a big aircraft carrier. Well, that's stupid too. And I'm sick of stupid. I want good advice for this president because I want this president to have a good legacy. And this nonsense on what's going on with Greenland is a distraction from the good work he's doing, and the amateurs who said it was a good idea should lose their jobs.
Keep that line, I'm sick of stupid, in mind as you listen to my guest, a cell biologist at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who has successfully turned basic research into commercially valuable therapeutic tools to fight cancer. Like the outgoing senator, Paul Maddox is also more than a little frustrated with the lack of intelligence and evidence in Washington these days. He's one of a historic number of scientists running for office this year, which should tell you something. To me, the Maddox campaign, whether it's successful or not, is local evidence of just how much trouble we're in. Don't misunderstand me. As someone with a biology degree myself, I love the idea of more scientists in public office. But the story you're about to hear, about how an accomplished cancer researcher came to the conclusion that he needs to be in Congress rather than his laboratory, is every bit as illuminating as anything you'll hear from Thom Tillis, or any other politician or pundit who's fed up with the craziness that dominates the news these days. What you won't hear in this interview is analysis of recent events. We don't get into the death of innocent protesters at the hands of ICE agents, or the abduction of the head of Venezuela's government, or the very real possibility that the United States is about to destroy NATO by invading the sovereign territory of one of our most reliable allies. We even avoid any mention of the changes in the recommended vaccination schedules that will almost certainly lead to more unnecessary deaths, even though I'm sure Paul Maddox has an opinion or two on that one. Instead, we talk about more fundamental ideas. What do the people of Western North Carolina want from their politicians? Are we really ready to abandon respect for science and expertise? And is it still possible to win an election by running on who you are instead of just which party you represent? We talked in Saluda earlier this month.
Paul Maddox, welcome to Folklore.
Thank you very much, James, and it's wonderful to be here in Saluda and Polk County. And I left Yancey County on the South Toe River this morning in a driving snow, and here I am in sunshine.
Well, I think most of us in Saluda find it a little bit chilly this morning, but it's still not a bad day. So begin by telling us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're going to want to focus on your career as a cancer researcher, but let's go right back to the beginning.
I grew up in Bent Creek, which is in sort of, one might say, a suburb of Asheville, it was a 2-lane highway and dairy farms, Billmore Dairy, and that's where I went to K through 8 school. I graduated from Inca High School in 1991, and I never really intended to leave Western North Carolina, to be truthful about it. I never wanted to. I always thought I would come back and make a living here and raise a family here. But life has a way of getting in the way, and I went to university at UNC Chapel Hill, and my senior year, I fell in love with research, and particularly I fell in love with cell division. And cell division is the as you might know, the root cause of all cancers, not just breast cancer or pancreatic cancer. It's how all cancers function. And so that problem, cell division, on one hand, is a very beautiful event. And it's a magical thing that it happens every time correctly, except when it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that's what leads to problems. And so I learned as a scientist, as a PhD research scientist, to dig at problems and to never let go. And to sometimes you have to face an adverse situation, the negative results, for instance, and say, well, how can I make that positive? Right. And so maybe I have to look at it from a different perspective. And you get 24 hours to be upset about something, but then you have to keep going because it's not going to solve itself. So I spent my career doing that, and has taken me around North America, and I've given talks around the world. I've taught in South America and in Europe and even Asia, Japan, and so I've seen a lot. I always wanted to come back here to Western North Carolina, and this two things happened. The Helene happened, and my mother and my brother and my stepfather live in Yancey County on the South Toe River on Highway 80 South, and my mom's family, my family, has been in that region since before Yancey County was a county, and so when Helene happened, I hadn't heard from them for 3 days, and I panicked, and I called my cousin, who my aunt lived across the river from my mom.
Yeah, sorry, you were at Chapel Hill.
I was at Chapel Hill. Sorry, yeah. My career path. I got my undergraduate degree at UNC. I got my PhD at UNC. My wife and I then went to do what's called postdoctoral training at UC San Diego in a cancer institute there. And then we were recruited to Montreal to a cancer institute there, and we lived in Montreal for 6 years. And then the opportunity came for us to move back to UNC, and my mentor and PhD advisor was retiring, and they wanted to fill the spot, and I was always sort of the next in line kind of person, and so we were recruited back to UNC in the Department of Biology in 2013. So we've been there since 2013, and
so you're in Chapel Hill when Helene hits.
That's right. And I remember I was on the phone with my stepdad Friday morning, on their landline at 9:30. He called me. He says, bridge is out, power's out, but we're fine. And because the house is up elevated. And then I called him back at 10, and everything, and the line was dead. And so I thought, well, all right, we'll figure it out. And then when I hadn't heard from him, I loaded everything I could into my Jeep, and I one gasoline generator, 10 gallons of gas, a solar generator, canned goods, water, all sorts of stuff into my Jeep, and I drove. I had a dead reckon because all the roads were closed, and it took me 7 hours, which would normally take 3.5 hours. And I went up around North Wilkesboro and Grandfather Mountain and on places I shouldn't have been driving. And it scared me, and I made it. And I saw my brother, he was coming across the field, and he said we wouldn't have made it another day. And so I said, well, you got an hour to load all your stuff, and we're out of here. And I dropped off. Here's a really wonderful story, actually. I dropped off the generator and all the supplies at the health center, which is about 5 miles downriver from where my mom lives. And I said, use all this stuff. I don't need it back or whatever. April of this year, I got a text. I've got your generator. You can come pick it up. And it was a neighbor, and it had been used by 4 different families at different times to keep them going through the recovery. And that just gives me chills even to talk about it now, that not, well, I'm very happy that it was used and it was put to wonderful use. But it's amazing that that these people, and that makes 5 different people that it went through, thought enough to give it back to me, and that just sort of, leaves an impression on a person. I knew I wanted to come back here. Like I said, I never wanted to leave. I've been trying to think about how to come back, and that really triggered me to really start to say, okay, I got to really think hard on this. And I'm not a politician, but then politics is something that I am concerned about as a citizen of the United States. And I have, a young family, well, not so young anymore, 18 and almost 14. And I'm concerned for their future. And when in the spring, so little back information, research grants are awarded, and in the money for like a 4-year period, 3-year period, 2-year period, whatever it is, and the money comes annually, and it comes at a certain point. I was waiting for my money to come. I filed my reports and everything to continue the grant, and it didn't come. And so I started to get nervous, and the department's like, well, how are we going to pay for these people? And I said, well, it'll come, and they said, I call the division where the grant's coming from, and I say,
Was this the NIH?
this one, these were from the Department of Energy in particular, and I had one from NASA also. And so I call them and I say, what's going on? They say, it's just delayed. And you check the website, delayed, announcements delayed. And then in April, again, I called them and they said, oh, well, your program officer doesn't exist. They cut the entire program from which my grants were coming from the Department of Energy. So I had back pay that I owed the university because they had been filling my gap. And then on top of that, I had to fire, 7, 8 people. And these are people I care about, and they're very smart, and they're doing research. And
These are like postdoc researchers?
Postdocs. There was 2 postdocs, 1 technician, 3 sort of undergrad technician types, and then a couple of, 3 grad students who stayed on, but they were teaching. I couldn't pay them anymore, so they had to teach to pay their stipends, and which is hard to do, to teach a full-time load and do research as a because that's their real job, is research. And that gutted me. And I have been independently funded since 2003. I've been very successful. I've published over 100 papers. I have I've transferred some of our technology from academia to industry by filing patents and that kind of thing. And I feel like I've been a pretty darn good citizen in that world. And I didn't know what to do.
And I take it the nature of your research and the patents you came out of that, it's not controversial stuff. This is basic medical science?
It's basic medical science, and it's how cells divide. And if you can understand, the better you understand how cells divide, the better you can treat and understand cancer and make people's lives better. That's the bottom line. And it wasn't like I was trying to, develop a green algae that will make biofuels or anything that was even remotely sort of controversial in my mind. I mean, if you asked 10 random people out here, is cancer research important? 10 people would probably say yes. I'm willing to put a lot of money on that.
And did you ever get any answer out of the Department of Energy on what happened?
No.
So in other words, you kind of got fed up.
Well, I went into a brief depression. I drank a lot of great IPAs from Western North Carolina. And then I was asking myself, and how does something like this happen, right? And why can a decision like that be taken unilaterally? And I said, well, I thought Congress was supposed to ask questions like that. Like, how does this make America a better place? How does this help the American people? And they didn't ask that question. I don't think they've asked any question of the executive branch. And not to get all sort of whatever granular about it, but that's oversight. And they're just sort of, they're just sort of like, whatever, just fine. Do whatever you want.
So that's really the answer to my first question. Why are you running for office? Why are you a scientist deciding to shift almost to the other end of the work-life spectrum to politics? There's a reason there's not too many scientists and engineers in government. You clearly saw the consequences of unexplainable decisions being made, and so you wanted to right the cart. But why choose NC-11 other than your historical family roots?
Yeah. A lot of people, when I first sort of started talking to the party, the Democratic Party, I'm a left-leaning moderate. I'm by no means a screaming the world's burning down kind of person. And so I talked to them and I said, well, what can I do? And I want to activate somehow. And so I started doing things like going to my precinct meetings, and I'm vice chair of my precinct, which is the UNC precinct. Well, I was until I moved. I'm on leave of absence right now from UNC, to be clear about that. And so the so they said, well, you could run for state office. You could do something like that. And I said, well, I see the value in that, but for the problem that I want to solve, it has to be at the federal level. And so I thought, my first thought was, I'll run for Senate, and I'll run against Tom Tillis, and which is even a bigger swing than what I'm taking now. And then I was advised, well, look, Roy Cooper's probably going to get in this thing. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to run against Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper would be a wonderful person to represent us. And so I thought, oh, my home district of Western North Carolina is in the midterm. I'll run for that. And so that's how, I got to where I am now. And it solves multiple problems for me. Yeah.
Well, one thing is you don't have to take on an incumbent. Say if you were running in Wake County or something closer to Chapel Hill, you'd have to take on a Democratic incumbent.
Yes. And that wouldn't help to solve my problem either, right? So to replace a Democrat with a Democrat is that's not going to fix the problem at heart. The problem is law. The balance of power the scales are tipped right now.
Okay, so let's move on to then the question of what separates you from the other folks who want this nomination. In other words, what can you offer specifically the folks in places like Polk County, which aren't that different from Yancey County, but or much of the rest of the district? Well, what can you offer the folks of Polk County that, say, Richard Hudspeth or Jamie Ager, you don't think that they can?
Well, so yesterday we were in a forum. Then there were four of us, and Zelda Briarwood was there also. And so I would never in a million years say anything bad about any of those other people, because they're good people, and I think they are. Each have strengths, and I respect them. I do. I, however, believe humbly that my years of getting to the bottom of a problem, looking at it from as every perspective possible, analyzing how to attack that problem, and using a tool to attack it. And if that tool doesn't exist, generating that tool and like saying, okay, how do we actually do that? And then do it. And that's how you move forward in science or in politics. I believe my skill set is transferable, if you will.
I would be the last person to argue ever against applying the scientific method to solve problems, because I think that's the invention of the scientific method is one of the greatest inventions in the history of all history. However, I think there are many folks who would say, yeah, there's a big difference between science and politics. And in science, you're interested in the truth. You're interested in things that work and in politics, you're interested in finding compromises. And though that's a fundamentally different thing.
Yes and no. I believe there are, let's see. So in research science, you are trying to get to the facts and say, this is factual. This is not factual. And I believe in politics, there are things that we can say, the climate is changing. Is it changing or is it not changing? And that is something that you could have an opinion about, but if you can't support your opinion with facts, then that's how you reach an understanding with your fellow congresspeople, or however you might call them, your peers. I also believe that the voting, population is a very, and maybe not even the voting population, but the electorate, the people of NC-11 are very independently minded. There are counties, I'm not sure about Polk County, but I know Mitchell County and Yancey County, and I believe Avery County are all, the plurality of voters are unaffiliated, are independents. And they vote for the person and not the party. And here's the for instance for you. I walk the streets of Burnsville. Well, there's not that many streets. It doesn't take long. And I go in the shops and I say, hey, and how's it going today? And stuff like that. And there's a fellow in there who's well, we got to know each other because his last name's Blevin. My mom's last name's Autry. Our papaws grew up in the same holler, that they were carpenters together, et cetera, et cetera. So, he's interested, he loves STEM. He's interested in flight and airplanes and stuff. But he also believes the Bible is a written truth. And I'm not here to tell him the Bible's not true. He can believe that if he wants. I am here to tell him that the fossil record is a factual thing. However, if he chooses not to believe in the fossil record, that's okay with me. He also says, I said, I'm running for Congress. He says, well, I vote for the other guy, but I vote for the person, not for the party. And it turns out we have a whole lot in common. We have several things that aren't in common, but we have a whole lot that are in common. And we can both say, live and let live about some of the other things which we disagree on.
Well, that seems to me, to be blunt, a little old-fashioned in a sense that there was a time where you would just choose the person who you agree with the most. But we're very, very polarized in this time, and I'm not sure that there are tons of people out there willing to set aside their differences in favor of their favorite subjects. Basically, they're saying you're either all aboard my set of things I care about, or you're not. You're saying you don't feel that it's the case.
When I talk to people in the holler, when I go to the hardware store, when I talk to people in the square in Burnsville, I feel like people want to be a little old fashioned about that kind of thing, and I think that's I think, yeah, call me old fashioned. I'm fine with that.
Well, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It would be great if we went back to a time before we weren't all polarized and most people weren't. It used to be you could not always predict how someone was going to vote. Now it's very easy to predict how people are going to vote based on how they voted before, or based on their religious affiliation or their demographic characteristics. So you're basically trying to appeal to our better angels, and despite the national trend, you're saying maybe the folks in Western North Carolina still have an independent streak.
Well, if there was ever a group of people that had an independent streak, it's people in Western North Carolina, and you won't find a more ornery group of people. And
Well, how have people responded to you as a scientist coming up and saying, "Hey, I wanna be your congressman," because there's got to be some people skeptical about that.
well, one thing I get a lot of is we need smart people in Congress, and for better or worse, they equate me having a PhD and being a scientist as being smart. I personally don't believe I'm that much smarter than anybody else, but that's neither here nor there. I work very hard. I will do, I don't stop until I get to where, some solution, and I look at things from lots of different angles, and that angle includes this guy who believes that the Bible is a written truth. You can't just ignore that. He believes that, and that's, for all I know, he's right. I can't disprove him, right? And so who am I to tell him that he's wrong?
I find this idea that people are demanding intelligence in our political representatives very interesting, because just this last few days, our outgoing Senator Tom Tillis stood up in the Senate and raged about the stupidity of so much of what is going on in Washington. And I kind of wonder, where has Tom been for the last 10
Where's
years?
that Tom been? Yeah.
But the point is, there is a widespread consensus that a large portion of America no longer trusts the intellectual elite, the academics, the scientists, the engineers, the folks that put us on the moon and created the internet. They're no longer respected and deferred to, and expertise is no longer respected in general. But you're suggesting maybe we've gone too far. Maybe things are starting to switch back?
My granny and papa didn't go to high school. They were experts at what they did. You could go out in the woods with my granny, and she could tell you 10 different things that would keep you alive if you were at any time of year, and that you would have no idea that you could actually consume, or that could be useful for you. And my papa could make anything out of anything. And he was a carpenter. He helped build the parkway. My mom didn't have electricity till she was in the 6th grade. This is just because I have a PhD doesn't make me more intelligent or more innovative than anybody up in the holler. I like to call myself a hillbilly scientist, and so, because I am, I find ways to get things done, just like people who need to get a spring going find a way to get a spring going.
Well, I've long thought that this notion that half of America no longer trusts people with PhDs to be a very superficial analysis, because when you get right down to it, most people do defer to experts. You go to your mechanic if you've got a problem with the brakes in your car, and most people still go to a dentist and not just try to yank their teeth out with a pair of pliers. It's just certain subjects are so far removed from the here and now that it's easy to pretend these people are out of touch with reality, when in fact the reality is just very, very complicated. And I'm wondering, when I hear Tom Tillis go on about the stupidity in Congress, maybe people are starting to recognize that we can't afford to dismiss experts.
So North Carolina, under the late Governor Hunt, founded the Research Triangle Park, and that was a brilliant stroke because the government, the state government recognized, and Governor Hunt specifically recognized, that we had a resource in 3 major universities that were in very close proximity, and the sort of innovation that was in that area was unique. But we needed a way to harness that, and that's what RTP is. I believe North Carolina citizens are proud and brag about things like RTP, and that was a political innovation, and a brilliant one, years before other people thought about, okay, well, we're going to have a small business park here, or we're going to do this or that there. And it was a big, bold move. And it's the kind of thing that people of North Carolina do. North Carolina people, especially the Western North Carolina people, are proud of the innovation that comes out of North Carolina. And I think if you look at the sort of beer industry in Western North Carolina, that's science and innovation. There's people doing that, testing things and coming up with new things. If you look at the old paper industry, which used to be here in Western North Carolina, and now there's other things which we need to harness and be smart about. And one of those things, I think, is artificial intelligence. And so if you, out in Cherokee County, there's data farms already being built out there, and people out there are upset about it because it's jacking up the price of energy, and because they consume energy like it's going out of style.
This is a national or international problem.
Oh yeah. And I happen to be the only candidate that I know of that I've used artificial intelligence since the 90s. And it is in different forms. It was called different things, but it's the same thing. And it's just boomed because of the chip technology behind it has just taken off. And the ability to do it has, at a fast and profitable rate, is now here upon us. And so we need people to think about how to regulate that. And how can people of Western North Carolina benefit from the building of data farms in our district? And I think, I have the sort of background that can leverage this and turn what could be a natural, like almost a disaster, into something that is profitable and brings resources to Western North Carolina.
So you think we have the electrical grid capacity and water, because both of those are needed for server farms. You think Western NC is a good place for that?
It could be, yeah, but it's we can't just let it happen without us having some control over it. There are state level things that need to be done, but also the biggest things that can be done are on the federal level. And this is something that is going to happen. We can't stop it from happening. However, we can turn that wave that's coming, we can surf it instead of being swallowed by it.
So in other words, it's something we need to be concerned about, and we need people who understand the issues involved. And you're right. I don't think anyone else has brought up this issue.
Well, I wouldn't expect them to, but, that's something I deal with like almost on a daily basis. Before, in my sort of research, we use it, and we use it for good, hopefully, and also as a professor teaching, I have students turning stuff in that's AI generated, and I can pick that out like easy.
For now.
Yeah. But, now I'm not a professor. I'm on leave, so I don't have to worry about that part of it. But I know about that. We don't need to be scared of it. We need to be aware of it.
Let's turn finally then to the question of temperament and almost philosophy, because here's something I noticed just the other day. Mo Davis, who wanted this job that you are looking for, he recently made a post about all the craziness that's going on in Venezuela and ICE and all this stuff. He got millions of views on his social media posts. In other words, a lot of people are paying attention to him and the sort of thing that he is doing. And he's not made himself a big fan of the Democratic State Party, because he's coarse language fills his posts, and he's very critical of the way in which the state party has kind of lined up behind Jamie Yeager and made it impossible for him to run a campaign. At least that's what he claims. But he has a posse. He has people who appreciate his kind of I'm kicking ass attitude. And I have to admit, when I look across the country, there's a woman up in Chicago who's doing this. There's, to a lesser extent, AOC and Zoran Mamdani in New York. They are little fireflies, sparks coming out.
Sometimes
That's
not
what
so
a lot
little.
of people are looking for.
Yeah.
Are they looking for someone with a lot of grant writing history, to put it bluntly? Because writing grants is something a lot of scientists have to do a lot of the time, and any senior scientist, it becomes the biggest part of their job. So is that really, can you take that one skill and transform it?
I'm not one to, let's say, I've been known to drop a curse word or two in my classes. I have passion about things. However, I'm a lover, not a fighter. Let's put it that way. And so Mo is a little more on the fighter side of things. I think he would just admit that.
I'd be proud of it.
Yeah. And I think that's great. But I believe that, how is fighting going to get us there? And so what we need is discussion and analysis and talk about it. And so, what good is fighting? That's what I would ask. And if somebody wants to throw a punch at me, they can throw a punch at me. I'm a big guy. I can take it. But that, to me, is not how to solve the problem. It's not going to make it go away. It's just going to make it grow. And so what we need is compromise, what you said earlier. And there's always a different solution than fighting, in my point of view. And I will also say, I have a character flaw. I am an eternal optimist, and I know that. And somehow I think you almost have to be a research scientist, because research is so you're told no 9 times out of 10. And if it could be no, you're told by the cells. You're asking the cells a question, and they just flip you the bird. Or you're told no, your paper isn't good enough, or no, your grant's not good enough. And you get a yes really rarely. And it's amazing that we all don't jump out the windows. But it's you have to be able to take a blow, absorb it, and say, okay, why did that person hit me? How can I come around and fix that? Why was that person upset with me?
Well, I agree. You do have to have a degree of hope sitting in the back of your head all the time when you're a scientist. And that is the one thing that I think good successful politicians share. I mean, Obama wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope. And if you listen to Zoran Mamdani, he is extraordinarily optimistic about things, perhaps unreasonably so, it seems at times. But so far it's working for him. And maybe being rough around the edges all of the time is not the way to make friends and influence people.
I mean, you're going to get attention, that's for sure. But is that solving the problem? So how are you going to solve the problem?
Well, I guess you're kind of hoping we've had peak polarization, peak animosity, and maybe you're on the edge of a new wave of civility.
A new old wave. My father died of multiple myeloma 9 years ago. He was a Vietnam vet, decorated soldier, and he died. So Agent Orange was known to directly linked to multiple myeloma. He was a lover, not a fighter, and he was a physician. I saw him help people that couldn't pay for his services. He used to take, everything in exchange for people wanting to give him stuff. And, one time he came home with a case of Pepsi, and like not a case, but like a crate, and he had a broken foot. And he said he made up this story that he fought off a robber from a Pepsi truck and broke his foot, and then as a reward, they gave him this case of Pepsi. But what really happened is that he slipped on the ice on the way to the hospital from his office and broke his foot. But one of his patients gave him a case of Pepsi as a payment. And I mean, it's easier for me to sit and talk to somebody and say, okay, why are you mad at me? Right? I'm more comfortable doing that than throwing a punch at somebody, or an insult, a virtual punch. I'd rather understand them.
Well, that is an optimistic view of politics. And I guess we'll find out if the Democrats who are voting and the independents who are going to cast a Democratic ballot, if they share that optimism.
Yeah.
So good luck.
Well, thanks, James.
Thank you.
I think that will be the last episode devoted to the Democratic candidates for NC-11. Remember that Polk County is split between NC-11 and NC-14, with Saluda and the Sunnyview Cooper's Gap portions in 11 and the rest in 14. If you haven't already, you can listen to my interviews with the Democrats in the running for NC-11, Zelda Briarwood, Jamie Ager, and Richard Hudspeth. There is one more candidate in that race, but I can't find any evidence that Lee Whipple's campaign is a serious one. You can also listen to my talk with Brent Caldwell, who is the leading Democrat running in NC-14. I've reached out to the Republicans who will appear on the primary ballot in March, but I haven't heard anything back from them yet. Stay tuned. As always, you can reach me with your thoughts and suggestions by emailing jamesh@polklore.com. Thanks for listening.